You're with Julian on the Brown Note and a review of Twisters, which is now on streaming and is a reboot of Twister, an iconic natural disaster film from, I think, the late 90s, which was, you know, we have the earthquake film, we have the Raging Inferno film, and this was the tornado film, which I guess had to happen later due to special effects, it not being that easy to recreate before the land of CGI. And it's an odd one because we did have a kind of reboot in 2014, which was the film Into the Storm, which I thought was pretty underrated. It wasn't very good, but it did have very strong tornado effects. So I'm kind of curious about this one because it uses the name Twister with an S on, but it's not that dissimilar to the Into the Storm movie, and it's not more similar to the original Twister film either. So it's kind of odd. Who's the director? Lee Isaac Chung, who... Minari. So Minari was one of the most acclaimed films from 2020. I did think that was massively overrated, about an Southeast Asian family growing up in America in poverty and so on, and it wasn't bad at all, but I certainly thought it was too slight to be quite as acclaimed as it was. But anyway, quite a different tone of film this time around. So we get broadly an amalgam of both Into the Storm and Twister, which is we get Daisy Edgar-Jones, who I am so ashamed to say that I watched Where the Crawdads Sing. I can't believe I watched that film. It's like my great shame that I actually watched that film. Oh dear. And I was immediately besotted with the captivating, haunting brown eyes of Daisy Edgar-Jones, who certainly, whatever she's in, has been singled out as a high point of even that terrible film. And I guess it's not... I guess there are analogous elements to both in that they're sort of vaguely Nicholas Sparks style romance films, even though they shouldn't be. So she's very much like the start of the Into the Storm film, where they've got like these college kids who get hit and killed by a giant tornado. She's someone who's at college trying to get funding. I thought there was an irony in her trying to get funding at college and her sort of self-importance later on in the film when her compadre at the time is getting funding from nefarious sources. I kind of thought, well, if you'd have got funding when you were younger, would it have been someone as bad as who the other guy is getting funding from now? So she's a student who's got this idea that you can dissipate a tornado by flooding it with certain elements. And with her 3 or 4 friends, she goes off to try and put this in the path of a tornado. The tornado in question ends up being multiple times bigger than they predicted and kills her boyfriend and all her friends apart from Anthony Ramos as Javi, who's her friend, and she's left injured, bloodily injured, and we jump forward 5 years to where she's working for some meteorological agency, looking very sort of forlorn and distant and lovely, and won't say anything to the world or contact her family until Javi comes along and says, you know, I've got this big funding from an organisation. We're going to go and try and continue the work that we were doing back in college and try and help people by understanding tornadoes better and doing all of this. And she goes off to work with him and is initially terrified of tornadoes for some reason, nearly putting a Kyber on the whole thing. And then we get the other element, which is the man of the moment, Glen Powell. I reviewed Hitman recently, fantastic film. And he was in Top Gun Maverick, and he's sort of showing up everywhere. It's sort of like Glen Powell's summer. And he's redneck rodeo, good-looking cowboy who is like the Nicholas Sparks element here coming on. But he runs the YouTube side of things, so he's with a group of tornado chasers that put on YouTube content by putting themselves in danger and amping up the whole thing. And that's the setup for the film, with the caveat that she begins to understand that the YouTube side of things is perhaps a lot more honourable than her side of things. And the rest of the movie plays out as you would imagine, including Maura Tierney, who everyone loved when she was in News Radio and ER. She shows up as Kate Carter, the Daisy Edgar-Jones mother. The three leads I thought were very good. Daisy and Glen and Anthony Ramos as Javi. I thought all three of those were very, very good. They occupy a love triangle of sorts. And it's got that's like the Nicholas Sparks things, like everyone's in love with the heroine. And you can imagine her drifting along on a lake, with like a long white dress going into the water, whereas the crawdads sing around her and so on. To be honest, I expected a lot more from this film. I am a sucker for big budget films when they're done right, and reading the reviews, I thought this had been done right. But to be honest, there's not much of a gap between this and Into the Storm. And this has got fairly decent reviews, and Into the Storm got 20% on Rotten Tomatoes. But I'm not really seeing that much of a difference. Not narratively, not in who the characters are or what they're doing. But the other thing is, you're going to go into this wanting the best ever representation of tornadoes. And 10 years ago, Into the Storm, I would hasten to say, did it better. They're a little bit blown out in this film. I mean, I wouldn't say I was in awe of the effects of the tornadoes. It's certainly a big budget film. The areas where I did think the film excelled were showing the aftermath of tornadoes. And it's annoying that the film is so tepid that it dips its toe into things like climate change. There's been a lot of controversy that it doesn't mention climate change directly as a cause of increasing ferocity of tornadoes. Though they do mention that they are increasing and droughts are increasing and so on. So it's like the elephant in the room that they're actually pointing at and describing without using the words, which was a little bit strange, but they don't completely ignore the fact that climate change is leading to worse weather events. But I did like the fact that they showed the aftermath, which you didn't get in the previous Twister films. They show these communities that are completely decimated. And there are definitely some great sequences, like the rodeo sequence as well. And it's probably the most scary. It's the closest to a horror movie of the three tornado films. It's quite frightening at times. The power of the tornadoes and so on is well done. Visually, there's a fire tornado in this film. I thought the fire tornado thing again was done in 2014 in Into the Storm, but that one was actually better looking. I thought they did it better. I wonder whether this one is trying to be more scientifically accurate than the previous ones. If so, that it shouldn't have been. It should have been about the best representation of the tornadoes that were happening. Whereas this time around, I like the final sequence, which you can guess what it's going to be about, felt a little bit low stakes. I felt like the earlier tornadoes felt a little bit more frightening and had higher stakes to them, whereas the final one, it was so obvious the way that everything was going to go, it kind of didn't really. I remember Into the Storm when they had the big one at the end and the guy gets sucked up 30,000 feet in the air in his truck and he sees the sunlight and everything is beautiful before flying down. I think it has the edge on this film, to be honest. So, a perfectly serviceable watch, but I was expecting something to be a lot better. So, I'm only going to give it a 6 out of 10 for Twisters.